I was in DC now like two weeks ago, and I had people come up to the car and just punch it. I had a guy drive by, put his window down, and punch my side view mirror. And by the way, I just want to be clear, like, there was no cutting of anyone off. There was no like questionable, like there was no other reason this was happening other than a boom.
It is a Cybertruck.
They might be self-aware.
Welcome to another episode of They Might Be Self-Aware. I am Hunter Powers, and joined, as always, Daniel, you're always there. But tell us your name, because maybe
I'm
people
Daniel.
don't know.
Daniel Bishop, since we're doing first name, last name,
Yeah.
none of you are
Very
ever going to
formal.
know my secret middle name.
Oh, Hunter is my secret middle name, so you'll never know my secret
Wait,
first
what?
name. Yeah, it's like
I'm
a
getting some
weird
deep Hunter lore right off the bat here today. Okay.
Little known fact. Always have gone by Hunter. It's a thing in my family where they give everyone the same first name, and then your unique name is your middle name. So of course, same first name, same last name, and then I don't know why. I still haven't figured that one out, and I think it ends with me. But I hate to if any family members are listening now, and there's like, the tradition will continue now.
Regathy Hunter Powers.
Hey, it could be.
Every week, I'm just going to try one more name, and I'm going to see if his eyes go wide. You got it. Okay, as a quick aside on that, I've heard something sort of along those lines before. There was a guy who went to the same high school as me, who had the same first and middle and last name, and he was the third. So his dad was, I used a made-up name, or Gregathy. So like this would be Gregathy, the third. Went to my high school, and wild. I like the idea of, we'll have all of the males in our family, like they have the first name, that's the same, then you might go by your middle name or whatever, but same first, middle, and last. It's intense.
Speaking of intense and AI related, not terribly long ago, I finally decided to get an AI car, a car that could drive itself to experience the revolution. And now I feel that revolution has turned around and it's like coming at me head on as fast as it can, as people have soured just the tiniest little bit on Tesla. Maybe you were in front of that. You saw the wave of coming.
I saw the spray paint on the walls, and I decided to get out before. The sale price of used Teslas has been going down at, I think it's like around double the rate of the depreciation of other cars. There have been like fire bombings. I think there was a group of Teslas that had like Molotov cocktails thrown at them in Vegas. People are having spray paint put onto their cars. It's especially, I think, the Cybertruck, because that one has Elon's name a little more associated with it than the 3YNS, but
I've sseen it happen.
They're
to
all getting kind of
all
targeted.
vehicles, which is also, it's just like, there's an insane part of it. Like, I mean, there's so many Teslas on the road. Well, there's Teslas everywhere, but people are just, and by the way, I just want to suggest that the majority of Tesla drivers are not politically aligned with the very thing that you are against. Now, I understand the objective is to, okay, yeah, maybe you aren't, but we want you to, turn your back and get rid of the vehicle to negatively impact the
vehicles are large purchases. I mean, like, just because someone in 2017 or whatever bought something before things kind of came to be the way that they are today, if you looked hard enough, maybe Elon's always been a tool, sure. But the last years, I think, have really kind of ramped that up. And that's what people are, I think, rightfully upset about. But if you've had a car, usually the second biggest purchase of your life, the biggest being a house, you can't just be like, I don't like the guy who's in charge of this car, I'm going to get a new one.
Yeah, and I'm going to go and attack everyone that currently has one.
Right, exactly.
I was in DC now like two weeks ago, and I had people come up to the car and just punch it. I had a guy drive by, put his window down, and punch my side view mirror. And by the way, I just want to be clear, like, there was no cutting of anyone off. There was no questionable, there was no other reason this was happening other than a boom.
It is a Cybertruck.
It flipped the window. It did not, the rear view, not the side view mirror. It flipped it sideways. It did not break it. But it did do that. And just, I got the people that like come in front of you and slam their brakes and flick you off for like absolutely nothing. I was like, geez, I'm not driving this car in DC again, at least not for a little while. I live in North Carolina. I've experienced much less of that in North Carolina. Although like we have protests on the street. It's really weird to see anti-Elon protesters as you're like driving down.
As you drive by and you're waving in your Cybertruck.
It's like if you like go back 5 years, like would you imagine? And again, it's like I live in a fairly small town. I had
a Tesla. Yeah. I got one because I thought I want to be part of the electric revolution. This is better for the environment. This is like the direction we should be going as a society. And I still think, accepting the Cybertruck, no offense, I really think that they're dumb bad cars. But the 3, the Y, the S, the idea behind Tesla, at least if you kind of unfocus your eyes a smidge, is electrification of cars. This is, in general, a good thing. I still very much believe in that. It's the main guy who's attached to the head of the company, an extremely public figure. He's divisive. Yeah, public and divisive. I will absolutely agree with you on that.
And he likes to troll.
Some people are very upset about anything associated with him these days.
He likes to troll. He is a troll. And I don't think like he would if he was on this podcast with us right now, he would put a big smirk on his face or something. He likes digging it in and trying to make fun of a very large portion of society, where if he could be just a little more politically even, maybe people wouldn't be attacking me in the streets for enjoying my AI car, which I drive less now because like I don't. And I got to keep Sentry mode on.
Target,
I keep Sentry mode on 100% of the time, which drains the battery, and I drive it much less. Or, I mean, I wasn't driving, and it was driving itself. Yeah, so how's that Rivian looking, by the
way? I didn't know who the CEO was until I looked him up for this. So I feel like that's basically a bonus.
Okay. Is that a good thing? Yeah.
Right out the gate. The fact that I don't know very intensely who the CEO is of this, I'll call that a positive, which is great, I think. And I mean, now I do because I looked him up. RJ Scaringe. Apparently he's from Florida, like from where I used to live, which is kind of neat. I don't think I went to... He's not the guy with the 3 names that are the same. I didn't go to high school with him. But I watched a video with him the other day. You actually sent it to me because I sent you a screenshot of, hey, I just got this update of now I can do hands-free driving, which I don't know if this is even something that Tesla has. You have the full self-driving, but I think it tells you keep your hands on the wheel, be ready to take over at any given time.
No.
Or have they started saying like, take a nap? We'll let you know.
Well, you can't take a nap. You've got to keep your eyes on the road, but you do not have to be touching the steering wheel. So it has a gaze detection.
Not even like you have to touch it every 30 seconds or something like that?
No.
Okay, all right. When I got rid of the Model 3, I couldn't do that yet. So now it seems that Rivian has caught up, at least for, I think it's like 15,000 miles or however much, some percentage of the bigger highways. Rivian still doesn't have the lower speed areas that Tesla does. So like your 45 mile per hours. And I think even some like city streets, you can kind of turn on auto steer and it'll keep the lane for you and whatnot. Rivian doesn't have that yet. I think it's on their 2025 roadmap. But we do now have, and I have not actually had the opportunity to test yet, so stay tuned, listeners and watchers, to have the hands are actually off. And it even has like a icon of the steering wheel with the hands like away from it. It has the gaze detection now. You have to have that on if you're going to do the hands off.
Pro tip, wear sunglasses. Can't tell where you're looking.
No, pro tip, keep your damn eyes on the road, Hunter. I like these technologies and I'll trust them to an extent, but I also watched a video of a guy with, I think it was a Model 3, I don't know, it was a 3 or it was one of the Teslas, who cares, where he had like a Wile E. Coyote style painting or, printed image or whatever of like a highway and drove the Model 3 on.
This is the Mark Rober video.
Yeah, just right through it. And he'd even kind of like pre-cut the edges of the styrofoam, because it's just styrofoam behind it, to have that like jagged outline like you'd see in a Looney Tunes cartoon. There's that famously like the first guy who died on autopilot because there was like a semi crossing in front that was the same white as clouds behind it or something. look, I'll trust them somewhat, but I'm not taking my eyes off the road on these autopilots.
So did the Rivian have, did the Rivian have any degree of self-driving before this? Or,
yeah.
Okay, so this adds the gaze highways, detection and improves the highway.
Yeah, exactly. It would do the lane keeping. It had the lane switch as well without having to be on the like diamond platinum tier, which I feel like you had to have the enhanced version with the Tesla. Maybe that's part of the core thing now. I don't know. But yeah, it'll do the lane keep, the enhanced cruise control or whatever you call it, where it'll speed up and slow down based on like how close the cars are in front of you and their speed. It would do the lane changes. And like it wouldn't do off ramps. It wouldn't do surface roads. Still doesn't, and still doesn't, respectively. But hands off. I'm looking forward to trying it. And people don't accost me in the car. So I do have that going for me.
Yeah. What's a few bruises, a broken side view mirror, a few dents.
Well, I'm really sorry to hear that people are, making assumptions about your associations and just taking out their frustrations on your vehicle.
It'll inevitably calm down, but yeah, what a weird and at least it's in an interesting world. I guess speaking of somewhat controversial or divisive CEOs, Sam Altman, a frequent topic on this show, has been in the news recently. I mean, he's always in the news. It continues to be in the news.
Some people just get to have all the news about them.
Yeah, I mean, that's the right. No press is bad press, and kind of idea, and that attention is all you need. That's what these guys figured out a long time ago.
Hey, there we go.
And they're definitely testing
AI,
this.
ML papers, love it.
Yeah. Because OpenAI is now what would we say? They're trying to get it sort of officially acknowledged that their use of copyright material is would fall under the fair use doctrine. That's the high level summary.
That's right. And there are two kind of main approaches that they're taking to why they should be allowed to do this. I think the unstated one is we don't want to have to pay for all of this content. And there are still a variety of big lawsuits making their way through the legal system that are supposed to determine if this is or is not fine. But the other two reasons that are being somewhat explicitly mentioned are this helps keep the US's competitive edge against China, which in terms of the quality of a model output, I think is a fair ask, because China is almost certainly not being very careful to use things that they only have legal access to and so on.
Sure, they have different laws. They're not breaking their laws.
Sure.
They're famously very strict there over there. When you break the laws, right? Like they'll sentence you to death over things here where we'll just, put you in jail for a couple of years. But one of their laws is not that you can't steal a US IP.
That's right. And so from a competitive edge perspective, I can absolutely see why OpenAIs and so ons would be very interested in not having to have this fight with one hand tied behind their back. Absolutely, I get it. The other one is for national security reasons, which is a great one to pull out if you want to be just given the green light for anything. Well, we have to be allowed to train on anything, otherwise the whole US is at risk. It is. Well, I guess you should be allowed to break all the rules then, shouldn't you?
Historically,
I don't know if I agree with that one.
What is so? It's just whoever has the best AI will eventually win all the wars. And in order to have the best AI, we need full access to all the copyrighted material. That's the simplified argument. Or is there something more to the national defense part?
I think the national defense thing I hadn't really heard at all until DeepSeek's R1 model came out. Incredibly powerful model from China that you can use over API, sending off probably your own proprietary whatever to China, which may not necessarily respect our IP. Very fair reason to say maybe we shouldn't be having a lot of people rely on sending our stuff overseas to folks that might not necessarily keep our secrets secret. But you can also download that model and run it locally or host a version of it on US-based servers or what have you. And for that second case, I think the national security concern probably goes away. At least mostly.
Well, I think
the reason why I say mostly is because we've spoken plenty of times about how you can align a model to certain ideologies. You can make a model, as it be US or any other country's perspective, right-leaning, left-leaning, or not allowed to talk about certain things, or encouraged to talk about certain things.
East-leaning, west-leaning.
Sure, exactly. I've seen multiple examples of, here I am chatting with DeepSeek, who is Winnie the Pooh?
Right.
And then, well, Winnie the Pooh is a fictional character made by such and such and this year and so on. And then, why are you not allowed to talk about that in China? And you can actually see it start doing its like thinking response. And then as soon as it hits a couple of tokens, like, whoops, I'm not supposed to be talking about that. It shuts that down and says, hey, why don't we talk about something else?
Well, it's my understanding that OpenAI is also, as part of this lobbying effort, pushing to ban the DeepSeek model as well as models like it.
Sure. Banning competition, and then also potentially banning some sort of way less obvious, you're not allowed to talk about Winnie the Pooh and China at the same time. Imagine if instead you were to talk about nuclear fissile material enrichment or something. I don't know, something way closer to actual national security, that the model had been very carefully fine-tuned, very carefully aligned to give wrong answers, very slightly wrong answers, or to give bad advice, or something along those lines. That's the only kind of way where I could see, hey, from a national security perspective, this model coming from a place that may not have our best interests at heart, we probably shouldn't be relying on. Fine. To say completely ban the model from like any Joe Schmo is allowed to just use it, I think that's pretty anti-competitive personally.
But we already do this. We're speaking about self-driving cars. Probably one of the top self-driving car companies is BYD out of China. They're not allowed to sell their cars here. I watched the videos on YouTube and like, wow, this is a really nice looking car. And they're whatever, $12.
Right. With tax. Yeah.
With tax. Because they're made by borderline slave labor. But we already have this idea that there are products made in other countries that would do really, really well in the United States. And we're saying, nope, not allowed to bring it in. We're outlawing it. We're outlawing the technology.
Exploding. For those of you who haven't heard about BYD, go look them up. Everyone's heard about Tesla as it relates to a self-driving, yes, I guess for the self-driving car thing, but also for electric cars. In 5 years' time, Tesla mindshare, at least outside of the US, is going to have dropped dramatically. BYD is exploding in popularity.
Just not in the United States, because the government has said no. If the government wasn't saying no, they would be on the streets of the United States. And I guess maybe
they'd be outcompeting like domestic versions of things. And so,
So we already do this.
I think.
Yeah. But we already do this. So the idea that they would say, okay, you can't run these models, it's just a little bit harder to enforce. I guess that's the biggest difference. Much harder to enforce. You're not allowed to download these weights. Right. Then you're not allowed to import a 10,000 pound, and it's not 10,000 pounds, but a very heavy vehicle. You wouldn't download a car, would you, Daniel?
Absolutely would.
Oh, there goes that argument.
I loved those commercials. Oh my God, those are so good.
Let's talk about another AI company, one that you're very fond of, and that's Anthropic. And apparently,
I'm fond of Anthropic, aren't I?
Well, according to their speaking of, which is like the CEO tour today, according to their CEO, pretty much all of programming is going to be solved by the end of this year. There's going to be very, very little programming, and I would assume that means very, very few programming jobs left at the end of 2025. They said it'll basically be able to generate all code by the end of this year, if I'm remembering correctly. No, what do you say about Anthropic now?
It was 90 to 100% of all code by the end of this year. Coding models, not just Anthropic's, everybody's, have gotten really good. Really good. I think the missing piece before we can basically get to that 90 to 100% is what's happening right now. It's that agentic revolution. It's not just, is a large language model good at tell it about something it makes code. It's that it reads your code base, that it can look up documentation online, that it can run the code, that it can look at the output that it can make, and then check against unit tests, that it can look at a product manager's notes and make sure that you're giving the right deliverables and so on. There is a difference between write code that does this thing and make a piece of software that is part of a cohesive whole, whether it's I'm making a website for myself or I'm making a microservice that fits into a larger ecosystem that I have to have sign off from 5 separate teams and weekly check-ins with, output, and, I have to make these schema changes because someone else's database doesn't have the such and such that, whatever that ends up being. There is a big, big difference between I just wrote some code and I wrote software. If I want to kind of make those as a distinction there. Writing code by the end of this year, if you have all of these tools hooked up into your software suite, whether it be VS Code or some other thing, I think that 90% is pretty attainable. I don't think that 100% is pretty attainable because there is enough.
Attainable with an engineer behind the scenes, or is it capable of replacing?
Right.
Can I reduce my staff by 90% by the end of this year? Is that what you're saying? And get the same output?
Right. So same output. I think you still need a highly trained person who is looking over these things, who is aware of that broader ecosystem that they're a part of. Now, granted, that could just be more agents plugged into more, tools. This one talks to Jira. This one has email access. This one's using your face in Zoom meetings. But I do think that you still need a person who is going to be involved in the actual bug checking, the actual bigger picture type stuff. I've mentioned multiple times now that I think more people are going to almost become like engineering managers instead of just the programmer themselves. But in order to get up to that technical lead type level, you do have to have the chops to do that. So is this absolutely going to decimate junior developers? I've said yes before. I'll keep saying yes. I don't think this is 100% of code that has been reviewed and is ready to go into its production environment, so to speak.
But that is what Anthropic's CEO is saying. Yeah. He's not making that distinction that you're making.
He's not making that nuance that I am. He's saying look, the code that ends up being used, that's made end of the year. We did it. We solved programming.
Yeah. I think I'm in the Linus camp on this. Linus Torvalds, the famous Linux creator, who's basically just
you're being angry at it and reject what the AI comes out with fervor.
I don't know if you've ever. I guess if people don't know, there's this guy. His name's Linus Torvalds. He's the creator of Linux, which now runs the majority. Is the underpinnings, the foundation of the majority of the internet's infrastructure. And there was other things before that. There's Unix as well. And so,
sure. Everything. But talk about some bona fides.
Yeah, yeah. And but he's famous for being a bit of a jerk. And I don't think that he would interpret it like that, but other people interpreting his behaviors as but it's beyond passion.
No, he's passionate.
So when people try to commit code to his code bases, he's famous for just ripping their heads off. And I can imagine the AI generated code coming in because he's very, very particular on his coding. So yeah, is it continuing to get better? Yes. Are we going to replace 90 to 100% of all programming? I don't know. No.
Well, there's also that difference to be made between code generated and programmers, because a programmer could still use Claude, or I use Klein, the extension in VS Code that's powered by default Claude. I use that to generate some code, a bunch of code, and I wouldn't say all of it by any stretch, but a lot of it, and it's probably an increasing amount. I could see a point where basically it's writing about 90%, and then I have to go in and make specific changes, and then you get into the kind of gray zone of okay, is it 100% if it wrote it and then I gave it very specific directions on what to change? And just the other day, I actually came up against that exact scenario. It wrote out a bunch of code. I saw, I would need to change this. And I got halfway through typing out, could you change this to accept the arguments from this function and put them here? And I thought, I'll just do it myself. Like this, this is a literal waste of money at this point. And then I went and it took me 30 seconds and I took this thing over here and I aligned that thing. It was just like, it updated a function. The function was being called in a different file. I have to go update that file too. And if I had Claude do that, is that 100% of all code? Or is that it did 90%? I noticed something was wrong. Yes, I directed it and I didn't type the code in, but like, I'm the person who realized these are insufficiently met needs.
I don't know. I think that's a very creative definition to defend 90%. I think if 90% needs to at least make you 90% more effective at what you're doing. If it saved 90% of your time, then yes. But as you're describing it, it maybe helped me write 90% of the code, which represented. I mean, there's the famous saying, "If I had more time, I would have written less code." Because a lot of engineering is thinking about it, thinking about how I want to build it, how I want to construct it, what's the architecture of this software. So we spend the majority of our times thinking about what we are going to do. And it's actually a small minority typing code with the keyboard. And
for sure,
saving that time on typing the code with the keyboard is not nearly as impressive as saving all of that time thinking.
Measure twice, cut once.
One last thing. So Claude 3.5 Sonnet has been like the golden child of programming for, I was going to say like a really long time, whatever that actually is. A good 6 months.
Years in AI time.
A good 6 months.
About a year.
And recently they've come out with 3.7. We've mentioned it before on the show. I'm curious.
It's too higher.
Have
skipped
you
past 3.6?
There's
3.7.
It's not nearly as well heralded as 3.5. Have you switched over to 3.7 in your development work, or are you still rocking 3.5?
3.5 continues to be great and is cheaper. And 3.7, I think, is better and is more expensive. And it's more expensive because one of the big changes is it's a thinking model, a reasoning model. And so, do this. Okay, I need to do this. I am now going to break down it into 3 steps. This. Because of those things, I now need to... And like, it does much of the same stuff that it was going to already do. It just does a slightly better job because it is decomposing your problem. It is thinking, really, for lack of a better term, and you can see like its step-by-step thought process as it goes, as opposed to when Claude 3.5 does stuff, the thinking is just in the activation of weights in a neural network, and it just starts spitting stuff out from left to right, just keep going, and now I am done. These pre-thinking sort of steps that give it a lot of context that it has, quote unquote, thought of before then coming to basically the conclusion. And that last like conclusion is what it sort of spits back out to you at the end.
I've had a lot of
better. I mean, I do a better. You just described. People are going to spend a lot of time thinking about the problem before doing less coding. It's the same thing that 3.7 is doing.
I've had a lot of challenges with 3.7 and specifically with the thinking, or at least that's my thinking of why I'm having these problems, where I give it a task. There's a new feature that I want to implement. Let's say it's a to-do list and I want a mode where I can see all the tasks that were completed in the last week. Please add this mode, Claude. So it starts thinking and it looks at the code that is written, the structure, and tries to figure out a path. But I've found that along the way, it will come up with other things that it would like to do. And you know what? I think I would also
since I'm in here.
Yeah, since I'm in here, I'm going to also tweak. I'm going to change this around. And I don't like how this goes. And by the way, like a human would do, you assign a task to an engineer and they come back and I did not ask you to do this. You did some other stuff. Well, I saw it and I just thought I wanted to clean this up a little bit, change it.
I was in the same code anyways. I might as well make this better while I'm working on it.
So I see that, like, I feel like realistically, like 15% of the time, it does something that it shouldn't have done, that it didn't want it to do. And then sometimes, maybe like 5% of the time, it gets stuck in like an ADHD sort of a thing, like, oh, squirrel. All right, I'm going over there, and it just keeps going and it never comes back to the main task. And I think I left one running for like 20 minutes and ate up a ton of credits just because I was like watching, like, what are you doing? And it was just making it worse and worse and worse and going off. So, but it's interesting that we allow it to think, and now I'm upset that it's thinking. Stop thinking. Just do what I asked you to do.
Well, is that why we then need to, for that 90 to 100%, you can't just have the coder. You need to then have the team lead who is more aware of kind of that next like level of work. And then you have the product manager agent, and then you have the UI UX research, whoever it ends up being. Do you need to then have not just one thread running at a time, but like someone who can kind of check in and say, hey, remember that thing that I asked you to do? You ain't doing it, buddy.
Yes, we need checks, although those checks can be agents as well. They certainly don't have to be humans.
That's the idea.
I mean, we need some self-awareness of what, who am I? What am I doing? And I think this is on the path to it. I think that we will see more of this, of AI running amok, of AI doing completely the wrong thing. I think it gets better before it gets worse, because I almost think it has to.
Why does it have to?
I think it has to, because if you're going to let people think, it has to first it has to learn how to think and how to think about all the possibilities.
We're in the infancy of that.
Correct.
Right now. Yeah.
Before now, I can use that giant brain, my thinking brain of mine, to understand here is the task and how to stay focused. Like, thinking is separate from focus, and going down and having awareness of, okay, yeah, there are all these other thoughts, but I really shouldn't think about those. I want to stay in this narrow path. So as we get but first we got to get really good at thinking before we can get really good at focusing. And that's my hypothesis of why it gets better before it gets worse. So maybe my previous hypothesis of this is the worst it'll ever be was a giant lie. Apologies, listeners. Or not, who knows, but
he spent some tokens thinking on it and changed his mind.
And they might be self-aware.
We did it.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in today. We'll be back very soon. And if you want to hear the next one, just hit the subscribe button. You can see it right there. It's looking nice. There may even be a little secret when you tap it. I don't know what's going to happen. Anything could happen.
Or if you're listening, pull out your phone, open up that keyboard, whatever it is, take a look. There it is. There's that subscribe button. Aha. And if you do that, you'll find us. What is it, a couple times a week?
Yeah, we're on a couple times a week now.
What's happening out there in the world?
We've been getting more
podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, TikTok. We're all over the place. Wherever you want to find us, I know you can.
Yes, and please participate. Leave a comment, leave a thumbs up. Maybe not a thumbs down, but if you really want to, leave a thumbs down. We've been getting more listener feedback and comments, and that's great to see. And we try to engage with every single piece, occasionally even bringing it up right here on...
They might be self-aware.